And
Right. I guess thanks, Mama. Thank you to everybody for finding time to come and listen to this conversation. Um, uh, I want to begin by saying two things. Scholars rarely say in public. Over my long association with Karen, there are two things that, two events that stand out very clearly in my own mind. The, the first one was when she intervened and and quickly tried to help me sort out a problem that had arisen with my visa, when in actual fact there was no problem. She took over the responsibility. She led the rules and regulations about H-1B visas and all these things. And to that I'm eternally. The second thing that I hardly say, but I haven't said in public, was I was coming up for promotion, and she was not very happy with how the whole dossier was being put across. And she walked across campus to collect my dossier to put it together herself. That was not her responsibility. That responsibility belonged to what? To somebody else. So to that, Karen, I'm personally eternally grateful. Thank you. Right. So let's say thank you to her for that.
I had forgotten about those two incidents, Makoni, but yeah, I do remember learning about H-1B visas and how they work, and uh, having to stick my nose in and say, no, wait, we can't
Yes,
take his visa away.
yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Anyway, well, thank you
yes,
for
yes.
those.
Thanks, and thank you very much for collecting my dossier and putting it.
I think I forgot that. You know, as most of you know, I just retired from Penn State. I've been there for 36 years. And once you are at an institution for that long, you know how things work. And I know what committees we're looking for, and I know what will trip up somebody. And I think in Makoni's case, I just had to put it together the way I knew that they would be looking at it. So that was just part of my job, Makoni.
No, that was part of your duty.
Institutional history is very important.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank
Yeah.
you. Good. Now let's, having put aside the personal important anecdote, I want to begin with a very general, with open question. Some of my colleagues who are here will have read your work, others might not have, but they would want to know, who is Karen Johnson? Where did she grow up? How did she end up here, etc. Right?
Oh
Because
my goodness, you want me to go back that far?
no, it depends where you, how far you want to go.
Well, yeah, so I'm originally from New York State, upstate New York, near Saratoga. I did my undergraduate work in Michigan at a small liberal arts college where I got a degree in actually special education. It was a teaching certificate, basically. Um, and then taught for a couple of years in the very northern part of New York State, just south of Montreal. And I taught special education at that time. They labeled these kids emotionally disturbed. I don't think that they would label them that anymore, but they were basically kids who had kind of rough home lives and not a lot of access to resources and just needed some structure. I don't think there was anything wrong with them. And then my husband and I went to the International School of Prague, and that was in 1980. We were there for 4 years, and I was the ESL teacher. That's how I got involved in ESL. So if you think about it, the Berlin Wall came down in 1989. So we were there at a time when it was still Eastern Bloc. And the school was American run. It was run by the embassy. But Czech people were not allowed to send their children there. So it was embassy children and children from trade commissioners. We had people from all over the world. And of course, English was the language that they connected with. And so teaching English at that school was pretty easy because the kids wanted to communicate with each other, and the only language that they really had was their native language and then English. So we did that for 4 years. Never really thought the Berlin Wall would come down. That was pretty shocking. Then we went to Syracuse, where my husband got a degree in library science, and I got a master's in TESOL, and then I went on for a PhD in English education. Actually, I was in the Department of Education. So my field is really education, even though I spent 36 years in the College of Liberal Arts, and they call me an applied linguist. I guess I am, but you have to spread out the definition of what a applied linguist. I did get a master's in linguistics at Syracuse. I took a lot of linguistics class, or maybe it was a minor. Um, so that's sort of my background. And at the farewell party that they had for me in the department, I told the story of how I defended my dissertation on a Friday in August, and I started at Penn State on a Monday. And stayed there. And not many academic careers follow that path. People move around and, they start one place and then they go to another place. But I was in a situation where really, really good people like Makoni came to Penn State. And I think the biggest change was the College of Liberal Arts decided they wanted to develop the Center for Language Acquisition, which was run at the time by Jim Lantoff. And Diane, you came many times to talk at Penn State. And just really, really good people ended up coming to Penn State. So there was really no reason for me to leave. Um, and we built a department of applied linguistics over, a number of years. But um, we were able to hire people. We were able to create the center. Jim was able to bring in quite a bit of funding, which supported graduate students. And we started a PhD program. So that's sort of my trajectory.
That's very interesting because how did I meet Karen? I came to Penn State. There was a conference that Jim Lanchoff had organized. I can't remember what the title of the conference was. And we had a conversation about Penn State. Then I went back to New York where I was teaching at Long Island. And then one day I received a call from Karen, says, "Can I speak to you? Is this the right moment to talk to you?" I said, "Yes," but I was in a meeting, so I walked out. And she said, "Would you consider coming to State College?" At that point, I wasn't very sure about the difference between the University of Pennsylvania and Penn State University. so, so I said, "Oh, that sounds interesting. I can come." So I came to Penn State, and then the rest is history. And I
Yeah,
got, then there was an office that Karen got for me.
yeah.
And I've stayed in that office longer than I've stayed in any part of the world. You remember that office, Karen, and there was the head of the communication studies. He wanted to take that office, and
Yep.
you fought and said, "No, no, no, no. This office belongs to African studies. It belongs to applied linguistics." And I still would use that office. Yeah, thank you. Okay. Now let me move on. What I would like to, the conversation I would like to continue with. Thanks a lot for explaining who Karen is and how you eventually got here. Then there is something that I want to ask you. I understand you are also interested and you are an expert at training dogs. Is that true?
Makoni, that was not on the list of questions
Oh,
that you
oh,
sent
okay.
to me.
Okay, we can push it aside.
But I will tell you, yes, I'm a lifelong dog trainer.
Mhm.
I grew up training dogs. My mother was a 4-H dog trainer. I've had dogs all my life, and actually, I still compete and show them in agility trials. I have two Australian Shepherds. Um, so I didn't put that on my CV, but thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, good. Now, the other issue that I want to raise with you, um, we were talking about institutional memory. How did the Department of Applied Linguistics, in what circumstances did it emerge in, at Penn State, and what role did you play in setting it up? Right.
Well, as I said, the college made a commitment to the Center for Language Acquisition, and
Uh-huh.
at the time there weren't a lot of centers. There are a lot now, but the
Okay.
idea was that you create institutional support for research and grant getting, basically, is what they wanted. They wanted money to come in from Department of Education or wherever, they could get money. And there were linguists and applied linguists sort of spread around the college. So there were people in French and German and psychology and Spanish and art. We were ESL at the time. And they wanted to sort of bring that together. And so setting up the center, which Jim Lantoff did, was sort of the thing that kind of brought us together. And when you have that many colleagues sort of, thinking, okay, so how, because we didn't have a PhD program at that time, how can we sort of establish a PhD program? And, um, that was sort of the start of that conversation. And we had, it was a little bit of a struggle, as it is in most institutions, because we had some sort of very traditional Chomskyan linguists that were in the department or in the program, along
Mhm.
with some sociocultural theorists. So it was very sort of schizophrenic for our students to take a syntax class and then take a class on sociocultural theory that was hard. It was hard to kind of put that together. But we eventually separated, and there's a Center for Language Sciences, and there is a program in linguistics. And then we have the Department of Applied Linguistics. And it really was a good move because it allowed us to sort of coalesce around the same sort of conceptions of language and how we would approach language and the way we would study language. And I was appointed as the program director in the beginning before we became a department, and I did that for about 6 years. And a lot of that was, putting together a curriculum and trying to figure out, what are the things that we expect our PhD students to know and be able to do. We also have a master's program in TESOL, so we have teacher training, that's going on. Um, Part of getting a department in place is really working with the administration, which isn't always easy. We did have a very supportive dean at the time. I worked with her for 27 years. She was very supportive of our department, and we were really also really productive. Like Diane, you'll probably remember we had two summer institutes that Jim ran, where he brought in scholars from all over the world for the summer, and we all hung out in State College and offered these little short courses for graduate students. And it brought just such a wealth of expertise and knowledge to the program. And so we kind of got this reputation of being, this is where applied linguistics is sort of happening. And I'll quote Steve Thorne on this because he used to talk about applied linguistics at Penn State was like a swirling vortex, like it just kept going around and everything sort of came together at the end. And I forget what year we became a department. I think it might have been 2000. Um, and I just yesterday got a email from Tommaso Milani, who's our new department head. And well, he's not new, he's been there now for several years. But he sent me the Stanford list of the most cited 2% of the highest cited linguists in the world, I think, right, Makoni? I don't know. I don't know who keeps this list at Stanford, but there's like 5 faculty in our department who are on this list. Um, so, we just have this reputation of being really productive. And when you're in an academic setting, administrators look at that and they say, oh, look, they get cited a lot, or look at the grants they brought in, or look at the summer institutes, or look where their graduate students are getting positions. Those are the kinds of things that sort of build the momentum of the reputation of a really good doctoral program. And, it takes time. I mean, that's what, it's 2025 now, so 25 years. But the reputation still stands. So I can't say played a complete role in that, Makoni. A lot of people that worked on that process, but I was the program chair at that time. Yeah.
Yeah. When you, I've never told this story in public. When you called me telephonically when I was in New York uh, to come to Penn State, I then had a conversation with my my advisor, my late advisor, Alan Davis at the
Yeah.
University of Edinburgh, and said, I'm considering getting to, going to Penn State, etc. Then he said, hold on. Since when did Vygotsky get interested in a positivist? That when you get there, that's the first question you must ask them. Uh, what do they want to do with a positivist? But I never thought of myself as a positivist, but I guess
Yeah.
that's what he thought of me. But
Yeah.
that's a
I mean,
different
I
thing.
think I think that, there's a lot of different people at Penn State.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and but I think the commonality is that we all see language as a social practice, as a social
Mm,
activity. And that makes a difference in terms of how you think about your research and how you study things and how you interact in the way in which you teach. And so that commonality of really seeing language as the social activity, as a social practice, as Jim G has argued, um, is the thing I think that holds the department together, still does. So
mm. And what you think, to some extent, is a follow-up to what Karen is saying, is how when you set up institutional uh, structures, some of the events that eventually take place are completely unanticipated. Let me give you a good example. Jim set up the Center for Language Acquisition. And he did quite a lot of interesting work. But recently, the new director of the center is interested in trying to collaborate with some of the African universities on African languages and technology. And Antisqua, who is here, who is doing a dual title degree in applied linguistics and African studies, is part of that process. So this long historical process takes its twists and turns as it goes along. Right.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I think in the beginning, before we actually had our own PhD program, the university had this mechanism of dual degrees. So
Yes.
you got a degree in applied linguistics and African studies, or in German, or in psychology. And that really just broadened what we could offer our graduate students, because they all come in with an interest in language, but they want to talk about language in the context that they're familiar with or what they're interested in. So, having a dual degree with applied linguistics and African studies is just such a good match. And there aren't, as far as I know, there aren't a lot of programs
No.
out there that have that kind of flexibility, that you can, sort of be in two departments. It
Fantastic.
allows for a lot of interdisciplinary work. And when you, like when I would teach classes, I would get students that were doing these dual degrees. And so you get
Mm,
different perspectives in your class, and they're reading the same readings, but they're understanding them very differently because they're coming from these different perspectives. So it makes for a very rich environment for the
mm,
students, and also I think for the faculty.
mm. Now, let me shift from Karen as an astute administrator and all that to talk about your areas of research expertise. Um, where did the term novice teacher come from?
Novice teacher.
You and Darren talk about these novice teachers, etc. And as I was I wanted to to use that as an entry point into discussing your areas of expertise.
Right, right.
Right.
Well, it probably comes from education, and
Mhm.
the people who are interested in education but haven't had a lot of classroom teaching
Okay.
experience. On the other hand, those same novice teachers have been in classrooms their whole lives,
Yeah.
right? So they know a lot about what goes on in classrooms. They've been
Yeah.
socialized into what is supposed to happen and how a teacher is supposed to act and what's supposed to happen, but when they come into a professional program like an MA TESOL, like what we had, we want to
Mhm.
sort of break that cycle of simply teaching the way you were
Okay.
taught, and
Okay.
getting them to think differently about what potentially could happen in a language classroom. That's influenced by a lot of things, but mostly by the context that you're working in.
Okay.
So I guess I would say a novice teacher is someone who hasn't had a lot of direct classroom experience. On the other hand, I can also say that in our MA program, we would get teachers who had actually had a lot of experience to come back and get a master's degree. And they could draw on that experience. So it's sort of a broader term than just somebody who's just come up through an undergraduate program and hasn't really spent any time in the classroom. And we had a mix of that in
Mm.
our MA program for many years.
Okay. Okay. Now, you have written quite a lot on Vygotsky and language teacher education. Can you talk to us a little bit about um, what type of research you are working on? Or some of my colleagues here might not be very familiar with
Sure, sure.
that
So
title.
I was first introduced to Vygotsky in my PhD program. So this was in like the mid 80s.
Mhm,
And I had a professor, Cheryl Spalding, who had been trained by James Britton at Stanford University.
mhm,
And she had us read two Vygotsky books. We read Mind and Society, which is sort of the
mhm.
classic, and we read Language and Thought. And, I thought I understood sociocultural theory, but I really didn't. But I think what drew me to it was that it's not a theory of language. It's not a theory of second language acquisition. It's not a social constructivist theory. It's a psychological theory about how human consciousness develops. So, there's this quote that I don't know if this is from Vygotsky or Landhoff, but we're all born with this biological organ, the brain, right? But where does the mind come from? So the mind, Vygotsky argued, comes from the culture, right? From your interactions, from the concepts that you're exposed to, from the interactions you're exposed to, from the history of your culture. And for me, in preparing teachers, I don't want to just give them like strategies or techniques of things to do. I want to change the way they think. So for me, Vygotsky is a very compelling theory because his argument was that if you change the social situation of development, if you change the context that you're in, because the mind develops, the consciousness develops through culture, if you change that, which we tried to do in our MA TESOL program, you change the way teachers think. And when you change the way they think, and hopefully through very compelling concepts,
Mhm,
then that changes their activity. And that, is in line with Vygotsky and sociocultural theory. And, over the years, I mean, I have such a different understanding of the theory than I did in the beginning, um, just from the reading that I've done and working with lots of students. And I think maybe my second sabbatical, I actually I just basically said, well, I'm going to really study this theory. I'm really going to read deeply. And I wrote a book called Second Language Teacher Education of Vygotskian's Perspective. And it was, how does this theory inform second language teacher education? And that reading, that deep, deep reading and having to write that um, really solidified my understanding. And then, of course, since that, I've done Darren Verde and Sharon Childs and I did a 2-year study of two cohorts actually of MA students going through our program, being exposed to. We don't have them read Vygotsky, but they do Vygotsky. They experience what a Vygotskian kind of pedagogy might be. And it's really about concept development and changing the way people think about what the potential of what you can do in a classroom. It's thinking about classrooms as thinking about teaching is not so much the delivery of content, which is what teaching is typically thought about, but it's the dialogic interaction you have with students. How do you take what you're trying to teach and make them interesting and relevant and meaningful to the students that you're working with? And so that has really informed not just the stuff I've written, but what I would do in all of my classes. And like I taught this course called Teaching in ESL, like what you think of typical methods classes. I never mentioned Vygotsky. They don't
mhm.
read Vygotsky. In fact, Diane, we start with your book and we talk about methods because it's that's the history of our field. But they experience it through the kinds of things that we set up in those in the course. So they actually have to plan a lesson and they have to think through concepts and they have to actually teach and then they have to talk about why they did what they did and they have to reason differently. And so it's a theoretical for me, it's a theoretical foundation that informs the pedagogy I do and informs the pedagogy that I write about. So that's really what has informed my publications over the years.
Right. Now I want to move on to the last part of this conversation, then we'll open it up to everybody. What are the plans now that you are in active retirement? What are you planning to do other
You
than not
know,
putting up
I get that
in?
question all the time, and people, the other question I get is, are you going to move to Florida? Like, why would I move to Florida? Like, I won't even go to that state. Why would I move there? Anyway, yeah, so last month I was in Melbourne, the University of
Mhm,
Melbourne. I went down and did a talk at the College of Education at the University of Melbourne and
mhm,
also at their like they have regional TESOLs in Australia, and this was the province of Victoria, because that's where Melbourne is situated. And so I gave a talk there, and that was a long flight, but it was a really good experience. I just with Jacob Rieker and Paula Gollenbeck, we just submitted a paper to the journal called Second Language Teacher Education. And they were basing this off a book the book that Mama mentioned about transformative innovations, and we're looking at the concept of teacher educator expertise and trying to
mhm.
sort of refashion the way you think about that as from a more of a Vygotskian perspective. So instead of saying that expertise is a set of dispositions or qualities or experiences. We're talking about it as an activity, as a thing you do and how you do it. And so we've sort of set up this frame, which the book was based on, and then we submitted this article for this journal. So right now, I actually haven't stopped doing what I
What
have
you
been
want
doing. I don't have to go on any committees. I don't have to. I don't have to write any reports. I'm still on a couple of doctoral committees, but I'm not chairing them. So we'll kind of see where that I'm intrigued by this idea of teacher educator expertise, and so I'm intrigued to see where that goes. I'll probably spend more time with my dogs, training. Um, but yeah, it's sort of too new to sort of say here I've got a whole new direction in my life right now. I'm sort of continuing
what you were doing.
what I've been working on. Yeah.
Yeah, at least you're continuing what you are doing without us bothering you.
Yeah.
But we
No
miss
emails. Yeah.
you. We miss you in the faculty meeting. I never, before it became public that you were going to retire, there was a phase in faculty meetings. Um, I remember saying to somebody, Karen is completely disengaged from this conversation. You would listen and never say anything. Then I said, but that's very unusual. I've been with her for many years here. This is a very different way in which she's reacting to it. I think you were saying to yourself, I've had enough of these arguments.
That is true, but I think also I held off retiring because, we had,
Yes,
was it 3 times we tried to hire a new head
yes,
and we had failed
yeah,
searches and I really wanted Tommaso to like be the head, right? So
yes.
let him like make the decisions and lead the discussion and sort of be in the background. And if he asks me a question, I'm happy to answer it. And then once he'd been there, I think about 2 years. And once I realized that, okay, he's got this under control, this department is not going to disappear. That was my fear. Universities, no, universities do that. If people leave, the department just disappears, right? So I really wanted to make sure that we had a head who was going to continue on. I mean, it's going to move in a different direction, clearly, which is perfectly normal and is a good thing. But I probably withdrew some of my assertiveness at those meetings to give him the opportunity to be the head. Um, so, but
Yeah,
I was always listening, Makoni. I was always listening.
yes, yes, I could see that. I could see that. Yeah, thank you very much for this
Sure.
conversation. Right. Now, let me hand over to Mama in case there are other people who want to have a conversation with Karen, particularly some of our younger colleagues who might not have a chance of working with Karen or getting to know her. Right. Who wants to jump in?
Sorry, I'm having a hard time to mute. Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Johnson. I think the floor is open now. If you want to ask a question or make a comment, you can raise your hand and go right ahead.
Mm. Who wants to?
I've got a question.
Yes, jump in, Sophia.
Sorry, I didn't raise my hand. So thank you for this very nice interaction. I just would like you to reflect on the ways in which your field has changed, evolved, reshaped in the past 36 years.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
yeah, how do if you could help us understand. I don't
Sure.
work in your field, so I'm
Yeah.
completely ignorant, but
Yeah.
that would be nice to have this take from you. Thank you.
Well, I guess that, if you think about the way teaching was thought about sort of in the 70s, it was sort of what do good teachers do to get high test scores, right? So it was all about sort of behaviors. And then we moved into, in the 70s and 80s, we moved into sort of cognitive processing, computers, and how does the mind make sense of things and information processing. And then it sort of moved into reflection. So I don't know if you're familiar with Donald Schoen's work, but when I was a doctoral student in the 80s, we read The Reflective Practitioner, and that is still quite popular. And then it sort of moved from thinking about the mind as this sort of individual cognitive thing that people have to thinking about it as more distributed, more social, thinking about, the social environment we're in and how that shapes the way we think about teaching. And, more recent research has really looked at on Diane. I know she had a doctor's appointment, but she's really looked at the theory, complexity theory, which comes from the hard sciences, trying to make sense of how we function within the environment that we're in and what are the interconnections between those. So there's really been this shift, and I think it's happened in teacher education, but it's also happened in second language acquisition, moving from it's all in the head to it's in the head, but it's also in the world, right? And so I think that's really been the biggest shift, that I think we've experienced over time. And then, really recognizing that, I think Donald Freeman said this, and I'll quote him, but it's, knowing that context is everything. Like the context that a teacher is working in is so critical to what they can and can't do, and recognizing that and getting them to be able to navigate the context that they're in and work within the boundaries that are set up for them and challenge those boundaries, but also, try to do what's best for their students. So context being Rick, a really important feature of thinking about how we prepare teachers for the future. And so the teachers that would come into our MA program, they were taken out of their context and put in ours, which was very different, obviously. And we had a lot of teachers from China and from South America, from the Middle East, Japan, Taiwan. And then they had to go back and they had to kind of make sense of how do I take these concepts that I've learned and these ways of thinking about what teaching can be, and how can I use that in the context that I'm in. And one of the things that we did in the book that I did with Darren and Sharon is we contacted teachers that had gone through our program 2 to 3 years after they'd left the program. And we interviewed them and said, so, how's it going? Like, are you able to, and, in many ways, they were able to navigate the demands of their context, and still be true to what they had learned. And others found, that were just environments that were not conducive to the way that they were thinking. So I don't know, I sort of got off tangent there, but that would be the trajectory, I would say. Education has gone from this very sort of individual cognitive in the head to much more social and cultural and contextual. Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes, Vanessa.
You talk about context being everything, and as I reflect over the past 30 or 40 years and see the animosities, I guess the best word, that's been generated towards second language learners in the United States, how has the teaching of the teachers changed or adapted to prepare them for the pragmatic force in cross-cultural communication and just being able to stand up for themselves and um, having a knowledge of the semantics or the reference of words that are necessary to respond to what they're facing in today's world?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it is really challenging. And I think looking through sort of what happened during the COVID pandemic and the political backlash to schools and teachers and education. There's always been some of that, but I think it really got amplified. And now in the United States, I mean, it's just a mess. What's happening right now? When I was in Australia, I just kept apologizing for being American because it's just so embarrassing. But I think that, teachers are a lot smarter than we give them credit for, and they know how to navigate, or they learn how to navigate the forces that are there. And many of them leave. They leave the profession because they just can't take it. But those that stay and are successful figure out ways to relate to parents, to relate to administrators, to relate to the children. I just got a postcard or a note from a student who's in our MA program from 1997 to 1999. And she, for many years, she worked for Major League Baseball in Costa Rica, recruiting baseball players. And she was like their English language teacher. But now she's teaching in the Rochester Public Schools in upstate New York. And they have a very large second language speaking population. And she just says she loves every day of it, she loves her students, she loves their family, she loves their communities. And, this is somebody who's been doing this for a really long time. So I guess, Vanessa, my answer is that I totally get where you're coming from, and it really is challenging times right now, but there are teachers really are resilient, and they are smarter than I think we give them credit for, and they are able to still reach the kids that need to be, cared for. And I can't say they're all successful, but I think those that are really prepared well to think about the lives of their students and what their worldview is, I think enables them to keep going and ignore the noise that they hear outside.
So has the curriculum been adapted for the teachers?
Well,
Adjust to the times, to adjust to the intensity of the times.
In the public schools, I'm not really that familiar because, again, we were in the College of Liberal Arts, and the reason we were there was because when I came to Penn State, there was no teaching certificate in ESL. So you couldn't become an ESL teacher in Pennsylvania. So we were put in the College of Liberal Arts rather than in education. So most of the teachers I've worked with work in English language programs, or they go back to their home countries and work. So I'm not that familiar with the curriculum, but I also would argue that you can take any curriculum, and it's not the book itself, it's what you do with it. And so we teach that to our teachers, that I do this activity where I give them this very old textbook unit, and I say, okay, you're all going to teach this. You have to teach this because I'm the administrator and I'm telling you have to teach this. But here's who your students are. So they're tourists that want to come to the United States on a vacation, or they're studying for the TOEFL, or they're whatever. And I give them these different contexts, and I say, okay, now take this unit and cut it up and add things to it and organize it differently, and then post it on the wall, and then talk me through how you would teach this. So they're all teaching the same curriculum, but they're teaching it very differently depending on who their students are. And when you start to think about curriculum that way, I mean, I go back to Doug Barnes, who, gosh, his book Communication to Curriculum moved me when I was a doctoral student. But his notion was it's not the materials, it's the interaction, it's the engagement, it's the way in which you work with whatever you have. And so I think if you get teachers to approach curriculum that way, they could teach from any book, and they can figure out a way to make that relevant to the students that are in front of them. And yeah, that would be my response.
Thank you.
Sure.
Eric has a question.
Yes, I do. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts with Karen. And Karen, thank you so much for this discussion. I mean, the way you approach Vygotsky, I mean, has really shaped my thinking a lot. And one of the things that I got from what you say is how you are able to get novice teachers to shift their understanding of teaching to ways that are consistent with socialization models.
Mm.
Yeah. Now, this is a challenge I have. I'm a teacher educator in Cameroon. That's home country. Um, my teachers come into the teaching program, to the training program with a BA, and I realized that their attitude or their understanding, their perception about teaching is shaped by their earlier school culture
Yep.
and experiences. And the greatest challenge I've had is to be able to get them shift this perspective in just 4 semesters.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll really be very, very grateful if you can share some insights on how this works. So, I mean, this is where I started developing this mentality that we can't ever train teachers.
Yeah, teacher education gets a bad rap. I would say the first thing that we try to do in our program is we start with where the teachers are. So I do this activity like the first day of class with the first group of students that come in, where I have them draw 2 visualizations. One is the typical teacher you've had, and the other one is the kind of teacher you want to be. So who's your imagined teacher? And I mean, I have hundreds of these drawings, and then of course they have to explain them, but they all show sort of the teacher up front, the distance between the teachers and the students. The students are these sort of like faceless blobs. They're just sitting out there in a row, and there's communication is only one way, and the teacher holds all the knowledge. That's sort of the kind of experience. That's the typical teacher they've had. And then when they draw their ideal teacher, they draw like a circle, and arrows are going in all directions, and the students all look different. And so we start off by saying, okay, so this is what you've experienced. This is the ideal teacher you want to be. How are we going to bring you there? How are we going to change the social situation of development in our courses to get you to be able to teach the way you imagined you could potentially teach? And having that ideal, this is another Vygotskian ideal or idea, that you have to have this sort of ideal that you're working towards. And so I think, starting where they are, getting them to imagine what they would like to be, what they imagine they could be, and then working with them through those I mean, our program is 4 semesters too. The project that I mentioned earlier that I did with Darren Verde and Sharon Childs was we actually collected data from 2 cohorts. I think we had 27 teachers in those 2 cohorts over a 4-semester period. And we basically collected everything we did in each one of our classes, and we traced their conceptual development over time. And that was the culmination of that was this book that was published in 2023. And it does take time, but if you create these environments for them to develop new concepts and think differently and have experiences where they have to talk through why they're doing what they're doing, and reaching this sort of imagined way of teaching, you do see development. But again, it doesn't happen in 1 semester. And for some students, it's like a light bulb going off right away. And for others, it takes a much longer time. It's not like they all develop in the same trajectory or at the same pattern. But they have to have that ideal. What do I want to be as a teacher? What do I imagine myself being as a teacher? if you can keep that in their mind and working towards that in the kind of experiences that you give them, that might sound like too easy of an answer, Eric, but that's the way I would think about it.
Well,
Thank you. Thank you so very much, Karen. Thank you so very much.
okay. So there's a question in the chat for you, Professor Johnson, from Alessandra Bernardes Bender. I am an English teacher in Brazil, and I would love to hear some examples that Dr. Karen thinks can be helpful for us here in South America. I usually joke saying I am a kind of psychologist first, or a coach, if you will, making students feel that they can learn and that they are enough and have what it takes.
Wow, that's a really good quote. I mean, it really is looking at students as individuals, as human beings, as you know, as something that can develop and grow. Yeah, I don't know if I can add to that. I think that's a really powerful way of thinking about, you're not just giving them information or delivering something to them or getting them to speak English. You're talking to a human being, and you're trying to get them to see the meaning in life and the meaning in language and what they want to do with the language and all of those kinds of things. And maybe we all are psychologists first and coaches. Yeah, that's a great comment. Thank you.
Ashraf has his hand raised. You have the floor, Ashraf.
Okay, thank you very much, Karen, for the useful presentation and reflection reflection about the trajectory of the field. That was very useful. I mean, the movement or the shift from fields from being individually based oriented to culturally oriented. Okay, I need to bring you back in dialogue with Sinfree. And because I had a chat about the ESL, the ideological and historical foundation of this field, and let me put the argument this way, so we can problematize the foundation of the field in this way, and see how Vygotsky can rescue the field from Sinfree's argument. The field of ESL is based on a notion of language that's colonial constructed.
Yeah.
Okay, the whole field. You agree with that argument?
I do.
Yeah, okay, that's great. Then categories like second, foreign. Now the question then, if you agree, how do we imagine the field without these categories as second, first, and foreign language? That's one thing. The second part of the question is, okay, if you consider language as an activity, I think you need to quantify what's meant by activity in Vygotsky's frame. Well, let's put this argument this way, because we've been developing this argument, Sinfree and I, and Christine in particular, Edwin as well. If we take language seriously as an activity, interaction, practice, so language is, or dynamic language is, in principle, unteachable.
Well, it might be unteachable, but you can experience it, right? So to answer your first question, I would defer to Makoni, because he's the expert on language not being language. I would agree with you that ESL has a somewhat troubled past, you know, its origins and its arguments for why, and then the whole notion of just the power of English, the globalization of English, is very troubling. And I think the field of applied linguistics has tried very hard to recognize that and to overcome it in some ways, or at least recognize the detrimental features of our past, and look towards the future. I forget the second question. I'm sorry.
I think you asked me, but you said language can be experienced. It cannot be taught, but it can be, yeah.
Well, so then you have to sort of make a distinction between sort of teaching and learning, and then that's another Vygotskian dichotomy that he argued against, right? That teaching and learning are one and the same, and it had to do with the translation of the word obuchenyi, which is a Russian word which means both. It means both teaching and learning. Now, in the Western world, we sort of think about you teach and they learn, right? But if you think about teaching as interaction and as engagement in activity through the use of language, that's a very different way of thinking about teaching. So I would go back to the Vygotskian notion that there's this dialectic relationship between teaching and learning. It isn't one or the other. It isn't that I teach and you learn. It's that we do both of those things. And so you can teach, learn a language through engagement with students and doing certain things. And for some students around the world, learning English is so they can pass the TOEFL. I mean, you have to take students' goals and what they want to achieve in their lives. You have to take that into account. And, I often tell our domestic students that when you go to China, you go to Taiwan, and you start to do these sort of interactive kind of activities with the students, they're going to be, wait, I have to pass the TOEFL. I want to get into the university, so let's study the TOEFL. So you have to get them to, think differently, and you have to accept that as something that students do need because this is the system they have to work in. But you can also do these kind of other activities that actually engage them in the kind of language that they would use to be able to pass the TOEFL, right? We don't just study the TOEFL, we play with and work with language, and that enables us to, get through these hurdles that are stuck in our way. So I guess I would just go back to your original question, can you teach a language? I would say that I think teaching and learning are interconnected.
Thank you. Why not thinking about, thanks for answering for engaging with the question, answering them. Why can't we argue or make a case for the abandonment of this what's called international exams? I
I would argue we could abandon them. In fact, during COVID, we did because people couldn't get access to them. I mean, my daughter at the time was a senior in high school. She tried 3 times or 4 times to take the SATs, and she couldn't because they wouldn't allow her in. So universities stopped using them or requiring them, and it really didn't change, like, you know, their admissions policies. And now they're sort of going back to them and saying, oh no, we have to use these. To be perfectly honest with you, I'd say it's an economic issue. It has to do with money. And the testing industry is like any other industry, a profit industry. And it's also a way of separating and dividing. So if you take a place like Penn State, at University Park alone, we have 47,000 students. They brought in 10,000 freshmen this year. How do you make a decision? I'm not defending them, but how do you make a decision about who you let in and you don't let in? And that's how that system works. And I don't agree with it, and I don't think it's fair because people who have access to resources do better on those tests than people that don't. But it is the system that we have to work in. And I don't think we can deny students the system that they have to work in, like say, oh, I'm not gonna prepare you for the TOEFL. That's not fair either. Yeah, that'd be my answer.
Thank you.
You well, there's a comment for you and I guess a question in the comment section. From Darren Verity says, "Thank you, Karen. As always, inspiring and humane."
Thank you,
And
Darren.
Bernard Mbache Bernard says, "Thank you so much for this discussion, Prof. Karen. I wish to find out how you've been able to transit from the era of teaching and learning, or transit the era of teaching and learning being centered around books to the internet and AI age. How did you manage to deal with the challenges that came with these transitions?"
Yeah, this is something we're all facing right now, which I think in some ways I feel like I have gotten out of academia at the right time. I not last year, but the year before in the spring, I taught an undergraduate course. It was called Multilingual Lives, and the purpose of the course was to get them to see the connection between social science concepts and second language acquisition and the humanities. So memoirs that were written by multilingual people. And so we sort of read these jointly and we talked about, so what's it like to learn a language as an adult? Well, what does SLA say about that? And what does David Sedaris say about that? He's a comedian that lived in Paris. Um, and in that, I'll get back to your AI and internet. In that class, I had several students that handed in assignments that were clearly written by AI. I mean, it was so easy to tell, just the way they were framed, the vocabulary they used. Like the opening paragraph of this one kid's essay had like 5 different metaphors in it. It's like nobody writes like that, right? So that was a struggle. And but what I did, and I don't know, Darren can probably speak to this better because she runs our writing program, but um, getting them to see why AI is not natural, why it is not the way we think. And it might look good and it might sound good, but that's not how anybody really writes. And I think once they become aware of that, they maybe can use AI to sort of get started, but then they have to go back and they have to look at that and say, and this is very tempting for language learners because they don't have the skills they need to be able to go back and sort of, okay, let me fix it in this way or let me write it in that way. But it was for me as an instructor, it was very easy to tell. And so I had to work with these kids and say, well, I can't accept what you handed in, but I will work with you on figuring out, okay, so what do you think about these two concepts that you're dealing with, and how are you answering the question that I gave you? I think the other thing in terms of AI and the internet is really getting students to sort of have this sort of, I don't know how to say this, but it's like internet literacy, like realizing that what you're looking at is not real all the time, most of the time, that it's concocted by someone and it's set up in a particular way, and being sort of critical about what you're taking off the internet and what you're being exposed to. And that I think has to be learned um, through, really critically looking at how is this word being used and why is it being used in this way? So here's an example for you. I use my own name, and I don't know if this is something you're aware of, but the name Karen in the United States for about the last, I don't know, 5, 6 years, maybe more, has this terrible connotation. It's a white privileged woman who basically can boss her way around and do whatever she wants. And so there was this baseball game recently in Philadelphia where there was a bunch of people who went for a fly ball, and a guy got it and he handed it to his son. And this white woman came over and basically bullied him out of giving the ball back to her. And she became the Phillies Karen. And so it was this, controversy that was sort of online. But what I tried to do with my students is say that the words we use change, the meanings change, and they're connected to things that happen in the social world. And so you need to recognize that about language and how it's being used and to think about that critically. And that's just one example of the way I've showed them that a simple word like my name can have this total different cultural connotation in the age of the internet and AI that never had when no one called me a Karen. I do remember though my teenage daughter, I've told the story before. I was at the bank. I think I was trying to get something done, and I was having a harder time, and I didn't yell at the woman, but I was kind of getting a little aggressive. And my daughter said to me, "Mom, don't be a Karen." And I was like, "Whoa, you have such a different understanding of my name than I do." So, that's how language works. And so getting students to sort of look at how language is being used and what are the cultural connotations behind it maybe can help us navigate this internet AI age, but it's tough. It's really tough. It's a great question.
Yeah. So how have you navigated trying to be a Karen and being asked not to be a Karen? That must be hard.
Oh, yeah, it's yeah.
There are no more questions but in the chat, but I think at this point we can move on to the after party.
Okay.
And yes, this section of this section of the session will be unmoderated. And so I'm going to stop recording